A genetic study just came out, 2.5 million people, and the strongest signal it found in fibromyalgia wasn't in the immune system, it wasn't inflammation. It was in the same gene that causes Huntington's disease, which is a severe neurological disease. Not the same illness, nothing like it clinically, but the same organ, the brain. Now, for as long as I've been practicing, fibromyalgia has been one of those diagnoses that splits a room of doctors. If you ask 10 different doctors what's actually causing it, you'll get answers ranging from the central nervous system to somatic, meaning coming from the body, to quietly off the record, some would say, I honestly am not sure if it's one thing. And now that's not doctors being lazy, that's doctors being honest about a genuine scientific gap. This video is about what just closed that gap, what the largest genetic study of fibromyalgia that's ever been done has actually found, why one gene in particular has researchers surprised, and what it means for anyone who spent years being told that their pain is not real. For about 40 years, it was described as consisting of widespread pain all over the body, alongside fatigue, brain fog, disrupted sleep, and a kind of heightened sensitivity to touch, to light, to noise that other people around the patient often cannot relate to. No blood test confirms it, no scan lights up, and here it is, which means that for decades the diagnosis has lived in a strange in-between space, real enough that doctors treat it, and uncertain enough that plenty of doctors have quietly wondered whether it's really one disease at all. And in that uncertainty, patients paid the price. They were told it's probably stress, or your blood tests are normal, or have you actually thought about seeing someone about anxiety? And the disease itself can cause anxiety as well. I'm not saying that those questions are never worth asking, but for a huge number of people, they were not the answers. They were a doctor who literally didn't have anything else to offer. And into that gap walked an entire industry that had answers, even if the evidence behind them didn't fit, such as leaky gut, adrenal fatigue, detox protocols costing hundreds of pounds a month. Not because those people had better science, but because they were actually willing to say, I believe you, when the system didn't just didn't have a better answer to give. And I think that's a failing of the medical system, unfortunately. And I think there's a lot that can be learned from that. I think that there's a lot that we can become more humble about and more empathic about, rather than just saying, well, this is not real. And that's a general thing that I'm saying there, not just related to fibromyalgia. Here is the complication underneath all of that. Even among specialists who took fibromyalgia completely seriously, there's been a real unresolved argument. Is this fundamentally a brain and nervous system problem? What's called central sensitization, where the pain processing system itself gets turned up too high? Or is there an immune or an autoimmune component sitting underneath some cases? And that's not a small distinction. It changes what you look for and what you'd actually tell a patient about their own body. And until very recently, the honest answer was we just don't have the genetic data to settle it. So that's been the gap, and now look what's landed in between here. In July of this year, so just a month ago, a team led by researchers at Mount Sinai in Toronto, working with the University of Michigan's Daniel Claw and collaborators across the world from about 11 different cohorts, published the largest genetic study of fibromyalgia ever conducted, and it came out in Nature Medicine, which is no small journal. 2.5 million people, just over 54,000 of them had fibromyalgia, and the rest formed the comparison group. And the scale of that really matters, because earlier genetic studies of fibromyalgia were small enough that findings often did not replicate. And this one is an order of magnitude bigger than anything that came before it. They found 26 specific regions of the genome associated with fibromyalgia risk. And when they looked at what those genes actually do in the body, the pattern was not scattered, it clustered hard around genes active in brain tissue and nerve cells. So for a recap, in plain terms, the genetic fingerprint of fibromyalgia points straight at the nervous system and not at the immune system. That's a really important finding, and for anyone who says, is this a part of a brain disease or an autoimmune argument, this is the first large, robust genetic evidence that comes down clearly on the side of it being a brain disease and not being an autoimmune disease. The co-author, Daniel Claw, put it plainly: it doesn't rule out an immune contribution in some individuals, but genetically, fibromyalgia does not look like an autoimmune condition at all. And I want to be very clear about what this does and doesn't prove, because that really matters. The headline. It tells us where the heritable risk sits, which organ system carries the genetic signal. It's not on its own a mechanism that we can point to and say, this is exactly how the pain happens, but it's the strongest evidence to date for where we should be keeping looking. Now, here's the part that made researchers really sit up. The strongest genetic signal in the whole study was on the gene called HTT, which is the Huntington's disease gene. And I really don't want you to get confused by this, so I'm going to say it again as plainly as possible. This is not the mutation that causes Huntington's disease. It's a different common variant in the same gene. Carrying it raises the fibromyalgia risk by around 9%, which is a modest population level shift. And it's not anything close to a diagnosis. Fibromyalgia and Huntington's are not the same disease. They don't look the same in clinic. And nobody with fibromyalgia is at raised risk of Huntington's just because of this. But genetically, they're pointing at the same neighborhood. And that's exactly the kind of connection that this channel exists to chase down. It's a genuine clue that nobody had before, even if it doesn't change what you do about it. Two more findings from this study. Both of them reframe something that doctors have believed for a very long time. The first of these is sex. Fibromyalgia has always been described as an overwhelmingly a woman's disease. Now, some older figures put it at even 9 times as common in women as it was in men. And this study found something very different, that the underlying genetic architecture, the actual biological risk, is nearly identical between men and women. So the biology is not sex skewed. The diagnosis rate has actually been sex skewed. So where did the old numbers come from? Well, largely from how fibromyalgia used to be diagnosed. It was diagnosed by a physical exam counting 18 specific tender points on the body, a method that in practice picked up far more women than men. And the criteria changed in 2016 to focus on widespread pain and symptom severity instead. And under the newer criteria, the ratio narrows dramatically. The study's own numbers today put a diagnosis rate at roughly 3 times more common in women than in men. And the co-author, again, Daniel Claw, in an interview, put his own clinical estimate at even lower, at 1.5 to 2 times that number. Either way, nowhere near 9. Now, that's a genuinely different disease profile than the one that most people, including plenty of doctors, still carry in their heads. So if you're a man who's been quietly told that your symptoms don't really fit fibromyalgia because it's a woman's condition, that reasoning was built on a flawed rule and not on your biology. Now, if any part of this, the dismissal, it's probably stress, the years before someone took the pain seriously sounds familiar, please tell me in the comments. I do read them. Second, overlap. The genetic risk for fibromyalgia significantly overlapped with the genetic risk for chronic low back pain, also for irritable bowel syndrome and for post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, one thing I don't want to gloss over is that this study also found genetic correlations with some autoimmune and psychiatric conditions too. Now, that's not a comorbidity signal. It's not evidence that it's itself driven by autoimmune or psychiatric mechanisms. The core heritable signal, remember, is in the brain. What the pain condition overlap does support is something research called nociplastic pain, which is a family of conditions that share a common thread. The pain processing system itself has become the problem, and not just whatever originally triggered it in the first place. Now, that's a big part of why the same treatment, certain antidepressants at low dose, graded activity, cognitive behavioral approaches, sleep-focused treatment, tend to help across a number of conditions, including fibromyalgia, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, tension headache, and bladder pain syndrome. It was never a coincidence. It's the same broken volume control. So here's what's actually at stake in all of this. For years, being told no known cause has quietly meant in a lot of consultation that there is not even a real disease. Patients have felt that gap even when no doctor said it out loud. And into that gap walked people selling expensive supplement protocols for a condition genuine science hadn't yet explained properly. And that gap was not a failure of individual doctors doing their best with incomplete evidence. It was a genuine hole in the evidence itself. This study doesn't close that hole completely, but it's the first time that the genetics have spoken very clearly enough to say that the strongest evidence now points to a real brain-based condition and not a diagnosis of exclusion, not a polite way of saying that we don't know, and not something that a supplement stack targeting some nefarious condition was ever going to fix, because the leak was never the mechanism to begin with in the case of people who say this is all. Leaky gut, by the way, does exist in some form, but it's not tied in the same way to this. So what actually changes? Not the day-to-day treatment, not yet. The interventions with real evidence behind them are unchanged. Graded exercise, cognitive behavioral therapy, sleep-focused treatment, and for some patients, low-dose amitriptyline. What this study does is explain why those particular treatments make biological sense. They're all aimed in different ways at recalibrating an overactive nervous system, which now has a genetic reason to be the target. There's one direction worth mentioning, and I want to be very clear about where it actually stands. Researchers are separately trialing low-intensity focused ultrasound and other forms of non-invasive brain stimulation aimed at the deep brain regions involved in pain processing. It's early, it's investigational, it's not yet an approved treatment, and it's not available in clinic. But it's the same broader shift that this study is a part of, taking fibromyalgia's brain biology seriously enough to target it directly. So to recap, the treatment plan today looks similar. The reason those treatments work just got a lot more solid, and there's a genuinely new avenue being tested because of studies just like this one. And Claw said something in discussing this study that I think is the real headline. More than any single gene, the field's next job isn't just bigger studies, it's catching this earlier. identifying people at risk before years of unexplained pain harden into a disability that's really much, much harder to reverse. So if you take one thing from this video, let it be this. If you or someone you love has just been told that their pain is probably stress, that's not a diagnosis. It's a doctor being honest that they really haven't got any ideas. The uncommon question worth asking isn't, am I making this up? It was never that way. It's, has anyone actually looked at this as a nervous system condition with a real evidence-based plan behind it? This is The Accidental Doctor, a place where we make sense of uncommon sense medicine. If you found this useful, please see these 2 videos over here. Thank you for listening. I hope you'll stick around to watch more videos and think about subscribing below. It would be much appreciated so that we can actually grow this channel together. I really want to build a community here. In the meantime, stay well, ciao for now, and I'll see you soon.